No, thanks very much, Victoria, and thank you everybody for joining this call today. Thanks for supporting this. So yeah, my name's Ellie. I work for a project called Wild Ingleborough. My role within the project is to find ways for people to connect with what we're doing here on the ground and with our reserves in this corner of the Dales. And I do outreach work, so I'm doing sort of work with school groups and local community groups and special interest groups, and also looking at ways of removing barriers for people who typically find this landscape hard to access. So what is this Wild Ingleborough project? Well, it's a landscape scale conservation project. So it's all about encouraging nature's recovery on a bigger scale than our organisations that are working together have been doing up until this point in the Dales. So it's linking together several Yorkshire Wildlife Trust reserves with the larger Ingleborough National Nature Reserve, which is managed by Natural England. The NNR has been managed by Natural England since the 90s. And the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust reserves have come into Yorkshire Wildlife Trust's stewardship over various points since the 1960s. But in recent years, we've acquired a few new, quite key, small but crucial pieces of land, which were kind of the catalyst for this project getting off the ground. It's quite a new approach to land management in this area. It's not something that there's been a huge amount of happening in England. We're working in partnership with Natural England. We're treating all of these different reserves and bits of land as one contiguous project rather than discrete nature reserves. And by doing this, it's allowing us to put the Lawton principles into practice. So the Lawton principles came out of a report called the State of Nature Report, or it's also known as the Lawton Report, in 2010. This was an independent review of wildlife sites around England, examining the state they were in, were they doing a good enough job for nature. And the outcome of this Lawton report, the Lawton principles that have now sort of been adopted by conservationists in England, are that we need sites that are bigger, better and more joined up. So those are kind of that's the key principles. Our wildlife sites were too small and fragmented, too isolated within the landscape, and that's what we need to address. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, just a few slides along. So this is where we're working. For those of you familiar with the area, the top corner where the two roads meet is Ribblehead. So Ribblehead Viaduct is just north of the project. The green bits of this area are the National Nature Reserve. So this is all Natural England's holding. Obviously, it's not quite joined up, but it's all part of the Ingleborough NNR. The summit of Ingleborough is just, I'm not actually sure if you can see my cursor, but the summit of Ingleborough is just off to the left of the project area. So the ridge comes down along the side of our project. The bits in red are the bits that belong to the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And also that yellow bit in the middle is our newest bit of land that we've taken on. So in total, we've got somewhere around 1,200 hectares now being managed for nature's recovery in this area. And it begins at the lowest altitude is 270 metres at the top end of the River Ribble, which is just in the corner of the area marked number 1, that's Ash's pasture, which is just on the right-hand side of the main road as you approach Ribblehead. And then we go right up to Simon Fell at 650 metres, so almost up to the summit of Ingleborough. We're not working on any of the commons at all. It's all land that's owned by the Natural England or Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. So we have no influence over what happens on other parts of Ingleborough. And before I look at that land in a little bit more detail, excuse me, I just lost my cursor again. There we go. I'm just going to explain briefly about this partnership. So I work for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. We're we're the sort of main organisation on the ground that are running the project. But we're a partnership of 6 organisations. So Natural England are obviously a big player as well, one of the other major landowners. A charity called the United Bank of Carbon have provided quite a lot of funds and also sit on our steering group. WWF are our major funder at the moment, so they're funding the project team through Aviva, the sort of donor organisation over the next 2 years. The University of Leeds also sort of running the monitoring side of the project and have also put some money into it, and the Woodland Trust have put quite a lot of money and expertise into the project through the Grow Back Greener Fund. So all of these organisations are represented on our steering group. So why is this different? Why is this something new and worth talking about? As I've already mentioned, the scale of the project is quite a new thing for this part of the world. There's plenty of work on this scale happening in Scotland and in various other places around Europe and beyond, but there's not a great deal of it happening in England. It is happening in England, but we're kind of one of the early projects like this to get off the ground. Our focus is less on sort of single species targets. We're looking at ecosystems and connections between habitats. The Lawton report, I'm not going to go on about this in too much detail because I could talk about it all night, but the main sort of outcome of the Lawton report was evidence that without changing the way we look at nature conservation in England, all we're really looking at is a managed decline of English wildlife. It's not enough to have very important and well managed nature reserves that are completely separate from each other within the environment. We need to find ways of bringing these areas together and creating big landscape scale opportunities for nature to flourish. So climate change gives them another imperative for this, because as temperatures change and habitats have a lot of pressure put on them, such as in ways we saw in the heat waves last summer, there's a real need for species, whether we're talking plant or animal species, to be able to move more within the landscape. We're seeing evidence of some sort of Scottish flora moving further north in the British Isles, and we may eventually lose them from the British Isles altogether because of climate change. But that's also happening on a smaller scale within our landscape. So the bigger the size of the project, the more scope there is for nature to find where it needs to be and to continue to flourish. So that's kind of our guiding principle, really, not what species are we trying to look after and in what numbers, but how can we create the conditions for nature to sort of find the balance it needs, really. Is it a rewilding project? This is a word that we do struggle with a bit because it's not really always a useful term. It conjures up all sorts of different things in people's minds that might or might not be accurate. A lot of people take that to mean completely removing human influence from the landscape, which we're definitely not doing. We are still managing different parts of our site in different ways. It's not, we're not doing something that's completely the opposite of farming. We're certainly not talking about introducing any apex predators back into the landscape or anything like that. We're trying to do something that's far more nuanced than that. However, this quote, which is taken from Rewilding Britain, the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature is allowed to take care of itself, that is something that sits quite comfortably with what we're doing. So yeah, it's a bit of a step into the unknown because we're looking to restore natural systems and observe what that means for the nature that lives within there, rather than trying to maintain certain conditions as they are. If we sort of think of conservation as being on a bit of a spectrum of like quite intensive management at one end and complete rewilding at the other end, where we just step back and let nature do its own thing. We're not doing that, but we're doing something in between those two extremes. And in some areas, we are moving more towards the taking a step back and letting nature do its thing. However, we also have areas that we're still managing in very traditional ways. For example, we have traditional hay meadows down in Ash's pasture and also at Colt Park, which we'll continue to manage as hay meadows need to be managed. We have grazing cattle on site all year round, and they're husbanded by a grazier. They're moved regularly, tended to regularly. We're not just sort of putting grazing animals into the landscape and then letting them breed and do their own thing, which is something that people might expect from a rewilding project. This, before I move on to the next slide, this picture is taken in Colt Park Wood, which is a fragment of ancient woodlands up just near just above Salt Lake Cottages on the way to Ribblehead. It's a really special bit of woodland. It's the limestone. It's actually limestone pavement underneath all this vegetation. The limestone grikes there are so deep and the clints are so massive that it's never been an area that was appropriate to be grazed. So it's always been like this, really. It's had very little human influence, very little animal interference. So it's interesting to see what limestone can look like. We're not suggesting that we want all the limestone pavements in the area to look like this, but it is interesting when we're used to seeing sort of bare exposed rock. And we think that that's sort of natural and that's what it should look like, but actually it also can look like this. And it can support a huge number of really special and unique species. Another area of significant interest in the area is Scar Close, which is part of the National Nature Reserve. Scar Close is an area that's been managed by Natural England for some 30 plus years, although it did only recently come into Natural England's ownership. It was leased before then. But Scar Close supports, it's been ungrazed for 30 plus years. Again, it's an area that's only ever been very lightly grazed because of the nature of the limestone. It's never really been suitable for intensive grazing, but now that it's been completely ungrazed for the past 3 decades, it supports over 260 botanical species, which includes some local rarities. For example, the rock rose, which is a flower that is the sole source of food for a rare butterfly called the northern brown argus, and there's not very much rock rose left in the Dales. We've found on some of the newer areas that we've taken over, which also contain a lot of limestone pavement, that as soon as the grazing pressure is alleviated, those areas do very quickly start to show wildflowers that have clearly been there in the seed bank all this time, but haven't really had a chance to flourish because they've just been grazed off straight away. So it's interesting to see what the potential of these limestone areas could be. This is a really good example of calcareous grassland that we have here in the Yorkshire Dales that can support a lot of really special and unique flora. And some of these species you don't find in very many places. I've mentioned the rock rose already, and the purple saxifrage, there's a little bit of that left in the Yorkshire Dales, but not very much at all. And it tends to just be found on the sort of very steep vertical crags where grazing animals can't get to. This one down in the bottom left, the Yorkshire sandwort, is endemic to Ingleborough. It's some people claim it's actually a subspecies, but of the English or Arctic sandwort, but it's a very special plant that you're not going to find anywhere else really. Bird's eye primrose is very common in this area. There's a lot of orchids grow on our sites, particularly Ashes Pasture and Souther Scales, and down in Ribblehead Quarry. So these are examples of some existing habitats within our site that we want to help them, get them into really good health, in some cases extend them a little bit and develop more habitats like these. So we've got some areas, this is on Bray pasture or high Bray pasture, somewhere on the east side of Ingleborough. So wood pasture, so kind of very open woodlands, which we have our cattle grazing on there in very low numbers. But also there's the opportunity for woodland scrub to develop. There's a lot of blanket bog on this area, which is obviously really important habitat for all sorts of invertebrates and wading birds. And then this is just a picture of one of the traditional hay meadows. This is down in Ashes Pasture as well, which it's probably one of the finest examples of traditional hay meadows that you'll find in this area. So by sort of supporting these kinds of habitats, we'll be starting to support much healthier populations of birds and all the species that the birds depend on. And I'm just going to look a little bit more at these new areas of land that were in that first map I showed you. So number one, that's Ashes Pasture, which has been YWT reserved for quite a long time. But the sort of catalyst for this Wild Ingleborough project was when the opportunity came up to purchase these bits here, number 2 and the yellow bit, which, as you can see, that allows us to start creating a meaningful wildlife corridor from the River Ribble all the way up onto Ingleborough and up to the National Nature Reserve. And also this little area here, Belfields Pasture, which is very close to, number 2 is Belfields Pasture. Number 5 is Salt Lake Quarry, which is a very small but really special little reserve next to the railway line. So it's allowing us to create this connection here between these areas. The this other bit, this strip here, number 4, Sellside Shore, isn't actually directly connected to the rest of the reserve, as you can see, but it's a really interesting site in its own right. It's not only really rich in calcareous grassland, and this top picture shows some of the orchids that appeared the first spring after the sheep had been removed. We had not seen orchids on there the previous year, but they were all there waiting. But it's also a really interesting archaeological site. It's got all sorts of really fascinating signs of how people lived in the past in this area, including this, you can't really see it very well here, but this beautiful monastic wall down the side of it. And then Ashes Shore, which is the yellow bit here. So this bit's really exciting because it allows us to connect Colt Park Wood down with the rest of the reserve. So there's hope that our management will help some of this woodland to start spreading down a little bit. That's just a lovely fairy ring that was found on Ashes Shore this autumn. So we've only just, this is our newest reserve, we've only just taken ownership of that in September this year. So we're just, the cattle are going to move onto it at some point, but we're just sort of letting it rest and seeing what happens this spring, really. I've mentioned a little bit about the cattle. So we do use cattle for conservation grazing. So they're in very low numbers. I think the density for conservation grazing is about half a cow per hectare. 1 cow for every 2 hectares. So Natural England have this herd of red polls and blue-grey cattle that live outside all year round, and we move them around from area to area. So the reason for using cattle rather than sheep is because they have very different grazing patterns. So the cattle are far less selective in the way they graze, rather than really seeking out those sweet flowers and sweet grasses and nibbling everything right down to the ground. They'll just kind of rip big mouthfuls of grass as they move along, which means they create like a mixture of sward heights, which is particularly suitable for ground nesting birds because they have somewhere to hide their nests and hide their chicks. And also they break up the ground, they remove a lot of the rank grasses, which allows the wildflowers to flourish. And also their heavy feet create these sort of puddled areas where invertebrates can flourish as well, which again creates a food source for the ground nesting birds. So they're a real sort of key ally in our conservation work. Another thing we're doing is tree planting. So woodland recovery is another key aim of ours. The landscape around here is pretty much devoid of native trees, of native woodlands. There is something like 1% of the Yorkshire Dales is covered in native woodland, which means that waiting for natural regeneration to happen is pretty unrealistic, really. It could take decades before those seeds found their way into the landscape. So that's why we're planting trees. We're focusing our planting on the areas where we would naturally expect to find trees if they were present in the landscape. So that's sort of up the gills and the steep-sided gullies. This map is showing the pale green areas are the steep-sided bits that we've identified as not really being suitable for ground nesting birds, not blanket bog, because we don't want to plant on the blanket bog. But this areas where, all things being equal, we would expect trees to do well. So the pale green areas are where we've planted mixed native species. We've planted things like downy birch, rowan, bird cherry, alder, various different willows, oak, blackthorn, hawthorn, and various other things. And we're also looking at cultivating some of the rarer montane scrub species, particularly the sort of specialist willows that you can't really buy commercially. So that's a bit of the project that we're going to be developing this year. The dark green bits are where we've done willow pegging. So we've gone to other parts of the NNR where we have that appropriate willow species already growing and taken cuttings, and then gone out with volunteers and planted them up the gills. So that's like right alongside the gills. So far, we've had over 5,000 volunteer hours on this tree planting, which is amazing. So that's been a mixture of people from the community, school groups, young rangers. We've had corporate groups, and also university groups. All sorts of different people have come out and helped plant trees. And it's something that people have really sort of really captured their imagination. I think tree planting is something that we find people are always really willing to do, which is fab. We're planting. We decided right from the start it would be plastic-free planting. We have experimented with various different types of plastic-free tree guards. So these ones in the picture here are the spiral guards, which are made of some sort of cellulose. We also had some bigger deer guards that were made from some kind of cashew nut industry byproduct. Actually, what we're mainly doing now is just planting without guards altogether for various reasons. Tree guards, even if they're plastic-free guards, they're obviously still, there is an industrial process involved in making them. There is still a carbon debt when you make those tree guards. They're expensive. It's really hard work getting them all up the mountainside, and especially the bigger ones that need stakes as well. It's a huge logistical effort getting everything you need up to plant with guards. So we decided, after experimenting with various different systems, that we would go plastic free unless there's a really compelling reason to use guards in a particular area. Another reason was that we found that the bigger guards weren't really up to the weather conditions either. A big storm and they all got blown over and bent the tree over, and we had to go up and spend hours and hours repairing them and replacing trees that had been snapped by the guards blown around. Trees do better when they're unguarded. It's really harsh conditions that we're planting trees in. So if they grow really fast in a nice warm sheltered tree guard and then pop up the top and can't cope, then that doesn't really work. So we expect trees to grow really slowly in this landscape. So they're better off just going in without a guard and dealing with it, really. It does mean that there's going to be more loss through browsing. There are deer up there, there are sheep that get in over the walls, there are rabbits and so on. So it means there'll be more losses, but this is kind of the favoured method now that's used by this type of project. So we're monitoring the losses and monitoring the progress of the trees over the years. So yeah, there's more of that going on this winter. We planted 67,000 trees last winter, and then we're just our winter tree planting is just kind of getting underway now. It started a bit late this year because of the mild autumn. The bare-rooted trees weren't available till December, so that's all happening over the next few months. Peatland restoration is another key part of what we're doing, what we're just starting to do. So over 60 hectares of our site is blanket bog. So blanket bog is a really valuable carbon store in its own right. Peatlands potentially can store up to 8 times more carbon than woodlands, although that's that figure sort of taken from various different studies, but it's a really important and rare habitat that we want to try and preserve. So we've had a survey done by the Yorkshire Peat Partnership on the condition of our peatlands, with recommendations of what we need to do to get them in this healthier condition as they can be. It's as well as being really important habitat for lots of plant species and sort of sphagnums and mosses and just different sedges. It's really important for birds, for the ground nesting birds, for the invertebrates that they need for their food source. It's also really important provider of ecosystem services. So flood mitigation, healthy peatland helps lock up an awful lot of water in the landscape and stop it from causing flooding downstream. Like I said, it can potentially lock up a lot of carbon from the atmosphere as well, and it can help with providing clean water downstream. So we want to look after our peatlands and keep them as peatlands and not turn them into woodland. I said that we weren't focusing on species and targets, but it's worth mentioning these 3 birds, because these are 3 extremely vulnerable bird species that we do have present on our project area. So the ring ouzel, at the last survey, there are 2 or possibly 3 breeding pairs of ring ouzel on Ingleborough, so really not very many at all. But we have the potential to create just the sort of environment that will support them. They need a mixture of mature woodlands and woodland edge, and also scrub and heathlands, and these are all the type of habitats that we're hoping to improve and create more of up here. And the black grouse, again, very small numbers, a handful of territorial males in the area. One bad season could see the end of black grouse on Ingleborough. So again, similar sort of mixture of woodland edge, boggy, invertebrate rich peaty areas, grassland and so on. And then the curlew, which are, as I'm sure you'd know, the curlew are really not doing brilliantly in this area at the moment. There's still a lot of them because they're a really long-lived bird, but they're not reproducing in the numbers that they need to be in order to maintain their population. This is for all sorts of different reasons: changing farming practices, increased predation, larger numbers of visitors disturbing nests. There's all sorts of reasons why the curlews are not doing well. We're really starting to see the drop off of the curlew population now as the older birds are dying out and not being replaced by younger birds. They need the really good quality mixed sward height grassland that we're trying to create. The best thing that could happen for the curlew is to just have a better habitat where they can successfully hide in and be undisturbed while they raise their chicks. So we are hoping that what we do is going to potentially support the curlews and help keep that small population of curlews on Ingleborough. Monitoring and research is a really important part of all of this, of being able to evidence that what we're doing does work, or if it's not working, work out why. As I mentioned, the University of Leeds are running the monitoring programmes. They're funding 2 monitoring and research assistants who are working here and on some of the conservation sites in the area. We've got, because we're on the NNR, we've got decades worth of monitoring records, which is brilliant. So we've got some really good baselines to start with. And that's looking at all sorts of things from invertebrates, birds, vegetation, and also looking at those ecosystem services as well. And then with the new areas of land, we've been working to establish some baseline measurements on there of the same things. And then there's been 2 long-standing British Trust for Ornithology transects have happened on the NNR for I don't actually know how long, but for quite a long time. And then we've added 2 new ones in as well. So for the past couple of years, they've been carried out and all the data from those has been recorded with the BTO. And then we also do our own Yorkshire Wildlife Trust annual survey of Ashes pasture as well. So in addition to that, we're looking at how our trees that we're planting are doing. We're also going to be doing some eyes on the bog research, as Victoria mentioned earlier on. We've got some sites that have just been getting set up today, in fact, so that we'll be inviting people to come and get involved with monitoring those as well over the coming months. And then our community, so this is the focus of my work, looking at ways we can involve the local community and visitors to the area, because this is an area that a lot of people that don't live in the Dales but might live in sort of the wider region consider to be sort of part of that, to be their landscape as well. So there's a whole range of different things going on to get people involved in the project, things like giving talks like this and introducing people to what we're doing, but also organising a series of guided walks and events throughout the spring and summer. And we're going to be working with some local school children this coming spring, which I'm really looking forward to. And then also looking to find ways of helping people access the Dales, and particularly Ingleborough, that might not be able to otherwise. So we've got an access fund, and we're working with a panel to help us work out what are the barriers. Sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're cultural, all sorts of different reasons why people would like to be part of this landscape, but don't feel able to. I'm also working with local businesses. So we've got lots of businesses on our doorstep that work in tourism and provide services for tourists, and we're looking at ways that we can help their business, they can help promote our work and help sort of develop sustainable tourism in this area. So what can we collectively do to make tourism a really positive thing for this area? Obviously it's a positive thing economically already, but there is also, with higher visitor numbers, there's a lot of pressure on local services, and we think there are things we can do to help mitigate what can be perceived as more negative impact of tourism, promoting transport use, promoting use of local businesses, and so on. And also looking whether there are opportunities for developing wildlife tourism. Wildlife isn't cited as a main reason why people visit this area of England, but it does have a lot of really special wildlife. So we're looking at ways that we can promote that a bit more and get people to come and really appreciate that side of our landscape, as well as it just being a place where you can come and do a 3 Peaks challenge or whatever. We also, last year and the year before, in the early days of the project, have carried out a whole series of community consultations. Sometimes that took the form of public meetings, and then we also, a series of workshops were run by an independent provider, so helping give people a way of expressing how they feel about what we're doing and this kind of work, and people's concerns about how things might be, how we might be changing things, or what we might be introducing that they don't want, and just giving people a chance to get things off their chest and also then feed into the project a bit. So when these workshops finished, we received a report which gave us a whole list of all the different ideas and suggestions that people came up with, which we've then built into our work plan. So over the next 2 years, we'll be reporting back on what we've actually done in response to those workshops. So we're not, things aren't fixed in stone. We want to work with the local community in order to make this project a positive thing in this landscape. These were 2 projects that ran last summer, they were both run through external partners, but the All Our Land project was supported by various people who were involved in Wild Ingleborough, and also part funded by Wild Ingleborough. And it was a way for local people, local young people was the focus, to explore how they feel about this landscape and how they feel about climate change. And it was done through a series of facilitated art workshops, so working with professional artists to just explore different techniques and really tap into their creativity and their imaginations. And there was an exhibition produced out of that was shown at the Folly up until, Folly being the museum in Settle, up until December. That work was on display, and at some point soon it's all going to be available to view online as well. And then Our Ingleborough was another project that was commissioned by WWF as part of Wild Ingleborough. So a filmmaker and an oral historian worked with local communities to capture, to have conversations with people and capture how they feel about the landscape and how they feel about conservation and their personal connections to the landscape and so on. And that became a film which is still available to view through our website, which I'll give you at the end. But it toured various community venues around the area in June last year. There was also some artwork that was commissioned by some local artists and also some local school children on the back of that. And then there was the Oral History Project, which is available as a series of podcasts through, I believe it's the Dales Museum in Hawes, through their website, I think is where you can hear those oral histories now. And a really important part of this for us was that it wasn't edited. The Our Ingleborough film, people could express things that were negative as well as positive about our work, in particular conservation work in general, and we wanted to give everybody the chance to say what they thought. We didn't then cut out all the bits that were critical or skeptical. So yeah, we were proud of it. We think it's a really good representation of like the complexities, the different people that have a stake in this landscape, the difficult questions that need to be asked when we talk about land use and who's it for and how we should use it. So yeah, just moving on from that, we can't shy away from the fact that when we talk about conservation and wildlife and biodiversity and climate change and what our landscape can contribute to those issues, that is difficult because it might mean doing some things differently. It might mean the landscape looking a bit different in years to come. And that's what we're really trying to unpick with those projects, but it's an ongoing conversation. I think that's not finished yet. We want to talk more about what is sustainable food production. What does that mean for a landscape like ours? What could that look like in the uplands in the future, given the changing climate around farm subsidies and sort of unstable markets and so on? How can we have a landscape that works for everybody and also works for nature? one possible answer to that is through the ELMS scheme, which is the government scheme that's replacing the sort of environmental stewardship subsidies and similar that have come through the EU up until now. So there's a project called, which some of you may have heard about already, there's a project called 3 Dales, which is going to be one of the pilot schemes within this new ELMS grant scheme. It's not a Wild Ingleborough project, but it's complementary to Wild Ingleborough, and it's going to be over the next 2 years, there's going to be a development phase of what this project could look like and how can we access some of this money that's going to be available for making environmental improvements to land and providing ecosystem services through our land. So yeah, we're really pleased that we were awarded that landscape recovery money, because it means that we can really start to make these schemes work in this landscape, and hopefully this is something that's going to support farmers and landowners into the future. Okay, so that's me. These are all the various different people and organisations that have contributed to this project over the last 2 years, and yeah, I'm really happy to take any questions if anybody has any.